This is Parkinson's effect on my family's life. My father's body is impacted by almost all the severe adversities of Parkinson's disease, complicated with blindness from a traumatic brain injury he suffered from a motorcycle accident when he was 24. He survived the accident with one prosthetic eye and recovered to live a normal life. At 46, we started noticing subtle changes in his body. One of his arms was shaking. He started to walk and drag one of his legs. He didn't understand what was happening and he tried to hide his symptoms. As time passed, the shaking and his leg dragging became more noticeable. He worked as a diesel mechanic and had incredible work ethic and was a provider for our family, as my mother is a stay-at-home mom. His occupation required strength and endurance, and the changes from Parkinson's disease made his job more difficult for him as time went by. A couple years later, the shaking spread to both arms, and the dragging of his leg was more apparent, which occasionally led to him falling. His vision was also declining, which contributed to less coordination and moving slower. It took 5 years for the changes to become more visible and difficult for him to conceal. He mentioned that while lying on his back at work, he felt as if he could not get up off the ground. He noticed less coordination when holding and working with tools, and his pace at work began to slow, and when he came home he was extremely tired and slept more often. He was reluctant to go to the doctor because he was in denial, and related all of these symptoms he was experiencing to changes in his body from football and lifting injuries from his past. More complications with his vision ended up with him being no longer able to drive. My dad was discouraged and frustrated over the changes he had no control over. His occupation became increasingly difficult due to less flexibility, muscle cramps, and pain. He suffered 2 significant falls at home, which caused him to rest more often and he became quieter and less joyful and less involved in our daily lives. My dad agreed to see his primary care doctor after much convincing from my mom and my grandparents. He was referred to a neurologist in Springfield, then a movement disorder neurologist in Worcester who diagnosed him at 51 with Parkinson's disease, the most likely cause being the traumatic brain injury from his motorcycle accident earlier in his life. He retired at 52. For the last 8 years, my mom has been the primary driver. Our family dynamic has changed, and he has stopped working completely. He is home all the time, but it's different from retiring at the end of a career. He was depressed, feeling displaced, accustomed to financially supporting his family and working hard. There were significant changes in our finances, but we adjusted and continued to live a great life. The most significant change over the last 8 years is that his world has become smaller. The Parkinson's has severely advanced. He is now 90% blind and has all the symptoms mentioned in the previous video. They prevent him from leaving the house unless he absolutely has to. He has difficulty swallowing, which means we have to do special food preparation for him, which usually includes cutting up his food to make sure it's small enough for him to swallow, urinary incontinence, and chronic constipation. He also occasionally suffers from confusion and hallucinations and also has difficulty sleeping and some issues with sleep disorders. My dad requires medications throughout the day that must be administered on a strict schedule. My mom